This pertains to the Cambridge Analytica situation, which impacted 87 million users. What do we know about the negotiations between Facebook and the FTC?
Well, the information that at this point is pretty preliminary, but what we know is that the two sides are talking. Facebook is cooperating with the agency, answering lots of questions about the Cambridge Analytica issue. And the way this looks like to be going is that this could be a settlement potentially that is many billions of dollars. Bloomberg wasn't able to confirm that there's been an actual number, put on the table, or that both sides are discussing an actual number for a fine. But that sort of looks like where this is going. I think the other big question, though, for Facebook and the FTC, besides the money, will be like, the conditions that the FTC might put on Facebook as part of any settlement, conditions on how Facebook conducts its business.
Now, Scott, the FTC is entitled to fine as much as $41,000 per violation. We're talking about 87 million users here, which is, if you multiply just those two numbers, is far more than just a couple $1 billion. Is this fine enough if it's in that range?
Look, if you just do the math the way you explained it, you're talking about a mega billion fine. I don't think it'll get there. I think that, and no proposal has been put before the commission yet, let alone the 5 commissioners. So it's a little bit early days to try to figure out what the size of that fine is. But look, the FTC is under pressure to demonstrate that it's got bite, not just bark. And I think that will figure into what's happening here. I do expect the fine to be with a B, but I don't think it'll be I don't think it'll be set at the maximum that the law allows, which is $41,000 per violation. But it'll be far more than the biggest fine to date, which is about $22.5 that the FTC fined against Google in 2012.
Right, which certainly doesn't even compare to a number in the billion-dollar range. But if the FTC needs to prove that it has a real bite, why negotiate at all?
Well, I think the reason to negotiate is, first of all, if you don't negotiate and you simply take it to court, I don't think it's necessarily a slam dunk for the FTC that they're going to win and that they're going to be able to prove violations of the consent decree. Remember, the FTC only gets to fine here because there's been a violation of a consent decree. I think there's some gray areas in the consent decree about whether and under what circumstances Facebook actually got consent from users in the case of Cambridge Analytica or in other cases or in other situations that the FTC may be reviewing. So going to court isn't necessarily a slam dunk. It's a long, drawn-out battle. I think they would prefer, and Facebook itself might prefer, to actually reach a negotiated resolution. So I think they will probably get to a number. But I think, as David pointed out, the real issue, or at least just as important issue, is exactly what are the other stipulations and requirements that are going to be part of this order, and how long will Facebook be bound by them. And I think that that's an equally important part of the remedy here.
Right. So, David, could Facebook actually be forced to change its business practices as a result of whatever is decided here?
Yes, potentially, and that's certainly what many privacy advocates want to see. They're not going to be just satisfied with a big fine. And they point to the old settlement in 2011 that got us to the situation. They point to that and they say, look, the FTC put a lot of conditions on what information Facebook was collecting from users, and it wasn't enforced and it didn't work. So this time around, we need to be, or the FTC needs to be much tougher, and there's a lot of pressure on the FTC at this time, not just from privacy advocates, but also from Capitol Hill. There's a lot of criticism of the agency that they've been sort of asleep at the switch, fair or not. But that's the criticism, and then this is a moment when there could be privacy legislation passed this year. Plenty of people think that this enforcement power should just be taken away from the FTC. So the chairman is really under the gun to do something pretty big.
Now, Scott, What exactly did Facebook do wrong in the Cambridge Analytica situation, and how much does it differ from every other Facebook scandal that seems to have broken on a weekly basis for the last year? I mean, Facebook is challenged weekly by the press, by multiple investigations. Is what happened in Cambridge Analytica so much more egregious than all of these other things, or should the FTC be investigating a lot more?
Well, there are certainly other things for the FTC to investigate. But remember that Cambridge Analytica is not a classic data breach, right? It's not a situation in which there was an infiltration by a threat actor and they breached Facebook and they got a whole bunch of personal information. That came later, actually, as Facebook itself announced. But what's at issue in Cambridge Analytica is the sharing of information with a third party, namely Cambridge Analytica, and not fully appreciating exactly what that gave Cambridge Analytica to, or rights to, or access to. And so what Cambridge, I think the issue for the FTC is whether or not Facebook fully realized that by having Facebook users download the Cambridge Analytica app and use it and answer questions, that at the same time, whoever answered the questionnaire was actually giving access to information from their friends as well. And so, the real issue is that they either did they know exactly what Cambridge Analytica was getting access to? Did they fail to police? Were they tight enough in terms of sort of monitoring, their contractual policies and sharing information with third parties? I think that's what makes it so different, is because, people had no idea, oh, if I download this app and answer this questionnaire, I'm giving access to my friends' information. And I think that's what makes it sort of particularly, I think that's what makes it sort of particularly stand out as an issue, because I don't think, a data breach is a data breach. That's troublesome in and of itself. Not having control over your information because you're using apps, takes it to a different position, I think.